Welcome, everyone, to today's Insider Threat Podcast. Our topics could be 4 surface account attacks and how to protect against them. I'm your host, Jonathan Sanders, CTO here at StealthBits, and joining me is Jeff Warren, our SVP of Technical Product Management. Jeff, thanks for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
All right, cool. Since Jeff is too shy to introduce himself, I'll give him the short intro. He's a cybersecurity veteran who's been in the trenches helping out organizations with their systems and looking at things like service counts for a pretty long time. And with that out of the way, let's get right to the main event. If you don't already know, this podcast is coordinated with a blog series and a video, and this will serve as sort of an expanse on that topic. But if you want to get the main stuff, we'll tell you how to at the bottom of this recording. So, Jeff, I've got some questions for you, as always. Let's get right into it, I guess. How many service accounts do you think in an organization will have an SPN associated with them? And I guess maybe also, is it an advantage to have an SPN associated with the service account from the organization's point of view? I know the attacker gets an advantage where there's an SPN there, but what does it give to the person who creates it? And also, maybe why would you have a service account without one?
Sure, yeah. So if you read the blog series about attacks against service accounts, a big part of it is leveraging these SPNs or service principal names. And they exist mostly so applications that run service accounts or non-human accounts can take advantage of integration with Kerberos authentication. And it's just needed for a lot of applications to really work and use a more secure authentication protocol. So if you look at the applications that use these natively out of the box, it's going to be most of the big ones that in the world of Microsoft you recognize, like SQL Server, Exchange, Active Directory Services, DFS. But even going beyond that into non-Microsoft apps, you can find Hadoop, Mongo, other database applications. They leverage SPNs. Even our own product, Stealth Audit, leverages SPNs because it's the secure way to integrate with Kerberos. So is it an advantage? It's kind of a necessity if you're going to run a service and integrate it with Kerberos. But as you find out in the attack series, and as we're going to talk about a little bit today, there are some disadvantages to it, to being secure. And there's attacks that can be perpetrated against these SPNs to compromise these service accounts and take them over.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm coming to you, as you know, Jeff, but I'll let everybody else know, from the Cloud Identity Summit here in Chicago. And Microsoft was on stage yesterday talking about the advancements they've made in their security. And this very topic came up in the Q&A sort of out in the hallway with the speaker. Don't have time to go into the details, but it's funny. This is definitely something that's on people's minds. So sticking with the Microsoft thing for a second, we're talking about using service accounts, sort of a generic construct, right? Whether or not you put an SPN in there. Microsoft's been offering different ways to do this for a while, right? They've had the managed service accounts. I think it was in 2008. And they released group managed service accounts in 2012. And a lot of the challenges we go through in the blog series are remediated with these, but not a lot of applications have adopted them. Do you have any ideas about why that is? And obviously, aside from the fact that, people just tend to do what they know what to do, but do you have ideas about why they specifically may have avoided these technologies?
The idea behind these approaches is really sound. If you read the series, the basic attack against service accounts requires them to have passwords that rarely change and passwords that can be easily guessed. If you have a password that's going to be 20 characters long and change every 30 days, all of the attacks that we're talking about are pretty much mitigated. So Microsoft, knowing this, came out with some approaches like in 2008 with managed service accounts. These will give you regularly rotating, really long, complex passwords. In 2008, though, it was kind of never really adopted because these accounts could only be used on one system at a time. It was very difficult and arduous to set them up. and they weren't even supported by Microsoft's premier applications like Microsoft SQL Server.
Right.
So people just didn't really take advantage of them. You couldn't even run scheduled tasks as them. So even somebody who's heavily into Microsoft couldn't take advantage of those. In comes group managed service accounts in 2012, solving a few of those problems. You can run an account on multiple systems now. You can run services. You can run scheduled tasks. There's support for SQL, but there's still a lot of limitations. I think one of the more prevalent adoption issues is a lot of this stuff is configured through PowerShell. There's no simple UI for it. It's a little bit script heavy, so you need to be in depth in your knowledge of Microsoft to leverage these and set them up. Also, applications have lagged behind because it is entirely Microsoft focused. If you're not a Microsoft app, not everybody adopts these types of technologies, and you have to go through an adoption phase because when you are adding a service account that's a managed service account, you're not entering a password, and the password is being regularly reset. So it's not something that just natively integrates into an application. So I think there's still some obstacles to preventing that, but for regular Windows services, for IIS now, Exchange, SQL, some of the big ones, companies should always be using managed service accounts.
Yeah, it's interesting you say the PowerShell thing. That also came up in the hallway conversation, and yeah, it was put as in the form of a question, right? When are you going to give us something that's going to take us out of the world of scripting to do this? Um, yeah, so I think you're right on target there. Now, since most people aren't using better approaches to having their service accounts, they're still pretty vulnerable to the kind of attacks that we cover in the blog series. But let's say a bad guy actually gets one of these credentials, and now they've got it and they're using it. Do you think that's more or less noticeable to the victim organization? In other words, is it easier to see this service account's been stolen versus a regular user account? And if so, why? Or if not, why?
Yeah. So that one you kind of have to say it depends. If you look at it, let's say you compromise an account for your patch management or your configuration management product, and that account is used to update every system in your environment. Is that they could connect to any system without seeming out of place. However, many service accounts are built to do a very specific thing on a very specific server, even at specific times. Those, if you were to compromise that and begin to use it from a computer that it's regularly not used from, or to a computer that it shouldn't be used to, if you're looking closely enough, you're going to notice those things right away. There also should be other indicators, but they're not always looked at. Logon type is a good one. Service accounts shouldn't be doing interactive logons. That should be prevented natively, but it often isn't. Just looking at interactive logons that have happened for service accounts should be a immediate red flag. And with these attacks, we're able to compromise the clear text password. So it's not just pass the hash and pass the ticket. We can interactively log on to any system we want to. So there's certain things that you should look out to that should tell you right away, this account is being misused and may be compromised.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the way people are approaching these problems these days, right? It's a lot of behavioral stuff, right? They're looking at exactly what you're saying, building a behavioral profile, and you can definitely see where certain service accounts would be easily noticed being out of place because, as you say, they're sort of single use, and that means their behavior is going to be extremely predictable. But others, with some of these automation systems or job management systems, their whole point in life is to go do some random thing in some random place at some random time that you need to have it do for business reasons. So, yeah, it can be very challenging depending on what the service account was actually built for. So, we, as you mentioned earlier, we use service accounts, right? Because we've built a system that goes out and does, well, lots of random things that people ask us to do when they ask them to do it. And we just did our first integration with a privileged identity management system with our friends at CyberArk. And that's helping us manage our own service account in a more secure way for those customers that have both solutions. And when you look out in the world, right, more orchestration systems, DevOps systems are looking to privileged identity management to help them do the same. Um, Really will make it harder for attackers in the long run to have that sort of integration, or is it just going to mean a different kind of attack? What do you think about that?
Privileged identity management systems are a great solution, and they pretty much are going to take the silver ticket attack here entirely off the table. They're going to give you the ability to have long, complex, regularly changed passwords, very difficult to crack. But they don't solve every problem, and customers should not feel that they're entirely safe when they have a privileged identity management solution. First, they are difficult to connect everywhere and be ubiquitous. Second, even when an account is vaulted, there's other ways around these systems. One of the things we're going to talk about in our future blog series that we're coming out with is using Active Directory permissions as a way to bypass privilege management systems. If you have native rights to reset passwords and take over accounts, change group memberships, you can escalate privileges and take over accounts with PIM solutions in place.
Yeah, and it's interesting. As you know, I know a little bit about PIM systems, and it's not even that it's hard to connect them everywhere, right? Or rather, it's not technically hard to connect them everywhere usually, right? The PIM systems usually make that reasonably easy. What it is, it's actually a political challenge in a lot of cases, right? Because you usually bring the system in, and the focus is on something like the administrative accounts, right? Administrator, root, all of the enable stuff on your network side, anything that's at that top level. And then once that's done, well, that's the problem. People get that word in their head. Oh, it's done. It's like, well, no, it's not. There's all these other things, these service accounts, for as a great example of today's topic, that can be just as damaging and dangerous, and they never end up taking those next steps, and they do get a false sense of security out of it, right? All right. Well, I don't want to keep us all here forever, even though I could keep asking you questions, Jeff. Um, so I'm going to start wrapping it up here. So thank you, Jeff, for joining us today on StealthBit's Insider Threat Podcast, and for sharing how organizations can protect themselves against service account attacks. For the folks in the audience, if you want to learn more, you can go to stealthbits.com. You'll find all the information about the service account attacks blog series and the webinar that are associated with it. And as well, you'll find our security best practices assessment, which can help you find and fix your top Active Directory risks, which would help save you from a lot of the trouble that you learned about in the series and here today. Thanks for joining us again, Jeff.
You got it.
All right, and thanks to everybody else. Have a good day.